Every great love begins with a single moment. Tonight, I'll share a story that will touch your heart and surprise you. Subscribe now, so you'll always be the first to discover the next unforgettable journey.
In a towering skyscraper in the heart of New York City, the name Adrian Cole carried weight heavier than steel. Adrian was a billionaire, the kind of man whose suits were stitched in Italy, whose watch cost more than most people's yearly salary, and whose icy blue eyes seemed to pierce through everyone he met. Employees of Cole Enterprises walked on eggshells whenever he passed, careful not to cross a man who built an empire on discipline, precision, and an almost ruthless focus. To them, Adrian Cole was untouchably an idol of success, but also a man without warmth. On the 28th floor, in a cubicle shoved near the back where the sunlight barely reached, worked Emily Carter. Emily was 26, graceful in her own way, with long auburn hair often tied back and eyes the color of autumn leaves. Yet no one seemed to notice her beauty inside those walls. She was the administrative assistant no one respected. Her ideas were overlooked in meetings, her name forgotten during introductions, and her work often claimed by louder voices. While others dressed in tailored suits, Emily wore simple skirts bought on sale, paired with cardigans her grandmother had once given her. To Adrian Cole, she was invisible. He might have signed her paycheck, but he never glanced her way. To her colleagues, Emily was just the girl who fetched coffee, the one they teased for always working late, the one who never spoke up for herself. And yet, behind her quiet demeanor, Emily carried a resilience no one bothered to see. She took the late shifts because she needed the money to support her ailing mother back home in Pennsylvania. She smiled at cruel jokes because it was easier than fighting back. And when others dismissed her, she found strength in silence, quietly learning everything about the company while everyone else underestimated her. Life at Cole Enterprises moved fast, a whirlwind of deals, meetings, and flashing headlines. Adrian Cole lived at the center of that storm, untouchable and feared. Emily Carter lived at its edges, unacknowledged and forgotten. Their worlds could not have been farther apart. He was the man whose face graced magazines under headlines like The Relentless Visionary or Wall Street's Cold King. She was the woman whose name never appeared in any report, whose desk plant was the only thing that bloomed in her little corner of the office, but life has a way of twisting fates together. Adrian's world of power and dominance was about to crumble in ways he never imagined. And Emily, the girl no one respected, would become the unlikely key to saving everything he had built. For now, though, their lives remained separate: the billionaire untouched by doubt, and the young woman who refused to let disrespect extinguish her quiet fire. The stage was set, even if neither of them knew it yet. The storm began not with thunder but with whispers. One morning, as the sun rose over Manhattan and painted the skyline gold, newspapers ran with a single headline that sent shockwaves across Wall Street: Adrian Cole accused of financial fraud. The words were stark, printed in bold ink, and within hours they spread like wildfire across television screens, business forums, and social media feeds. Adrian, the man who seemed untouchable, was suddenly dragged into the mud of suspicion. Inside Cole Enterprises, panic swelled like a rising tide. Stock prices began to tumble, investors demanded answers, and reporters crowded outside the glass doors of the skyscraper, their cameras ready to capture the fall of a titan. Employees whispered nervously in the hallways, their voices hushed but their eyes wide with fear. They all knew what a single scandal could mean. Companies could collapse overnight. Fortunes could vanish before lunchtime. In the boardroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The board of directors sat around the gleaming oak table, their expressions tight, their voices sharp. "Adrian, you have to act," one of them pressed. "This company cannot survive weeks of uncertainty." Another chimed in, "We need to show the world stability. Investors must believe that your personal life is settled, that you are not reckless." Their solution was as cold and calculated as any business deal: Adrian Cole had to get married. Quickly. To the public, a stable marriage meant trust, responsibility, and integrity. To the markets, it meant reassurance. Adrian listened in silence, his jaw tight, his mind racing. Marriage was not a word he ever intended to entertain. He believed in contracts, not vows and mergers, not emotions. Love, to him, was a distraction, a liability. Yet here he was, the empire he built trembling, his board demanding that he find a wife not for companionship, but for survival. The irony was not lost on him. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals across continents, but now his future rested on something as personal and to him, as pointless as marriage. Meanwhile, far away from the polished boardroom, Emily Carter sat in her cubicle, her hands hovering over her keyboard as she scrolled through the headlines. Her heart sank. Though no one noticed her in the grand scheme of things, she felt the weight of the company's crisis pressing on her shoulders just like everyone else. This job wasn't just a paycheck, it was her lifeline, the only thing keeping her and her mother afloat. If the company went down, so would she. She looked around the office, saw colleagues whispering and some even smirking at the billionaire's downfall, and she shook her head. Adrian Cole might have been cold and distant, but Emily couldn't bring herself to gloat over another person's misery. That day stretched endlessly. Phones rang off the hook. Analysts' reports piled up, each bleaker than the last. News anchors speculated on television about how long Cole Enterprises could last before collapsing. And in the midst of it all, Adrian stood like a statue, his outward calm masking the storm brewing within. He knew better than anyone how fragile power could be, how quickly empires could crumble. That evening, as the city lights flickered to life outside his window, Adrian stared at the reflection of his own face in the glass. He was a man used to control, to order, to bending the world to his will. But this was chaos, and chaos demanded sacrifices. If he had to marry to save his empire, then so be it. It would not be love. It would not even be personal. It would be strategy, as sharp and necessary as any corporate move he had ever made. And somewhere, quietly, fate began to draw lines between two people who did not yet know how deeply their lives would entwine. Adrian Cole, the man accused, the titan standing on the edge of ruin. And Emily Carter, the woman no one respected, whose hidden strength was waiting to be revealed. The storm had only just begun. The chaos at Cole Enterprises grew louder with each passing day. Stock prices dipped lower, rumors spiraled like wildfire, and the media camped outside the building as if waiting to witness the final collapse of a kingdom. But while the executives wrestled with panic and Adrian Cole faced the board's unrelenting pressure, a young woman no one paid attention to sat quietly at her desk, combing through files no one else bothered to check. Emily Carter had always been overlooked. Yet she carried an instinct for details, the kind of sharp eye that noticed when numbers didn't quite add up. That afternoon, as she pored over trading reports and financial data, she saw something unusual: numbers shifting in patterns too neat, too calculated, too artificial. At first, she thought it was a mistake. But as she followed the trails, she realized what was happening. The scandal wasn't born from Adrian's missteps at all. The company was under attack. Someone had manipulated the system, planting false transactions designed to make Adrian look guilty and to destroy the company from the inside out. Her heart raced as she pieced it together. Emily scribbled notes, cross-referenced dates, and uncovered digital footprints left by hackers, footprints that led not to Adrian, but to a competitor long hungry to see him fall. It was proof, undeniable and explosive. The truth could save Cole Enterprises, maybe even save Adrian himself. But when she tried to speak up, no one wanted to listen. In the office, surrounded by her peers, Emily held out her notes. "There's something wrong with these numbers," she began, her voice steady though her palms trembled. "They've been tampered with. This isn't Mr. Cole's doing, it's sabotage." The response was laughter. One manager scoffed. "Emily, you're an assistant, not an analyst. Leave the numbers to the professionals." Another rolled his eyes. "You think you've uncovered a grand conspiracy? Please. Stick to scheduling." The sting of their dismissal was sharp, but not surprising. She had been invisible for so long that even when she held the truth in her hands, they could not see her worth. Still, Emily refused to back down. She clutched her notes, determined to find someone who would listen. Fate intervened in the form of Adrian Cole himself. Late that evening, after a grueling day of meetings, Adrian walked past the nearly empty office and noticed Emily at her desk, papers spread around her like pieces of a puzzle. Most employees had long gone home, but there she was, relentless. Something about her focus caught his attention. "What are you doing here?" His voice was cold, commanding, the voice of a man used to obedience. Emily looked up, startled, then gathered her courage. "I've been reviewing the reports, Mr. Cole. The accusations against you are false. Someone is manipulating the system." She slid her notes toward him, her hands firm even though her heart pounded. Adrian frowned, skeptical. Billionaires were not accustomed to taking lessons from invisible assistants. But as he glanced at the numbers, something shifted. Her findings weren't guesses, they were precise, detailed, and pointed to exactly what had been gnawing at him in private. For the first time, someone else had seen the hidden cracks he suspected but couldn't prove. He studied her, his piercing blue eyes narrowing. "You're telling me you found this on your own?" Emily nodded. "Yes, sir. And I think if you let me, I can trace it back to the source." In that moment, Adrian saw something he had never expected in her: not meekness, not fragility, but quiet strength. She had been invisible to the world, yet she had uncovered the truth that could save him. He didn't say thank you. Gratitude was not in his nature, but he did something rarer. He listened. Emily Carter, the girl no one respected, had just changed the game. She was no longer a shadow in the back of the office. She was a voice, a force, and Adrian Cole knew the tides of fate had just turned. Adrian Cole was not a man who hesitated. When faced with impossible odds, he made decisions the way other men drew breath, quickly, decisively, without apology. Yet the choice before him now was unlike any he had ever made. The board's demand still echoed in his ears: marriage. To Adrian, it wasn't romance or companionship, it was strategy, a tool to steady his empire. His mind calculated outcomes the way it always did, and slowly, one face surfaced from the crowd of possibilities. Not a socialite, not a celebrity, not a woman groomed by wealth. But Emily Carter. The invisible assistant who had seen the truth when no one else had. It was an outrageous thought. She wasn't part of his world, at least not until now. But she had something rare: honesty. She had no agenda, no hunger for his fortune, and she had already risked her standing by stepping forward with proof that could clear his name. Adrian needed stability, someone the press could not dismiss as shallow or opportunistic. And so, for perhaps the first time in his life, he chose someone not from power, but from obscurity. The proposal, or rather, the arrangement, was not made with flowers or soft words. Adrian called Emily into his private office, a space of marble and glass, where the skyline of New York stretched endlessly beyond the windows. She walked in nervously, clutching her notepad, her eyes darting as if expecting a reprimand. Instead, he stood by his desk and said in his deep, unflinching tone, "Emily, I need you to marry me." She froze. For a heartbeat, she thought she had misheard. "Excuse me?" Adrian didn't blink. "It's not what you think. The company is under siege. The board demands stability, and marriage is their solution. You uncovered the sabotage, and I respect that. Now I need you for something greater. This will be a contract, nothing more. You'll play the role of my wife until this crisis passes. In return, you'll be compensated beyond anything you've dreamed." Emily's heart pounded. She felt her knees weaken, and she gripped the back of a chair for balance. "You're asking me to lie to the world? To stand beside you in front of cameras and pretend?" "Yes," Adrian answered, his gaze unwavering. "But it will not be a lie forever. It will be an arrangement. Legal, binding, professional. You will have protection, wealth, and influence. And in return, you will give me your presence, your name beside Manito. Steady this empire." Emily's mind raced. She thought of her sick mother, the bills stacking up, the endless struggle of living paycheck to paycheck. She thought of the colleagues who had mocked her, the loneliness of being unseen. And here was Adrian Cole, the billionaire no one dared question, asking her of all people step into the spotlight as his wife. "I don't belong in your world," she whispered. Adrian leaned closer, his voice softer now, though no less commanding. "You do now." The weight of his words pressed into her chest. She wanted to refuse, to laugh at the absurdity. Yet something in his eyes, something raw, perhaps even desperate, made her pause. For all his wealth and power, Adrian Cole was a man standing on the edge of ruin. And for the first time, he was reaching out not to another titan, but to her. Silence filled the office, broken only by the hum of the city below. Finally, Emily spoke. "I'll do it. But not for the money. I'll do it for the company, for the people whose jobs depend on this place." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then, with the faintest nod, he replied, "Then we have an agreement." A contract was drafted, clinical and cold. Terms of the arrangement, duration of the marriage, financial assurance, it was all laid out like any business deal. Emily signed with trembling hands, while Adrian's signature was sharp, practiced, without hesitation. And just like that, a line was crossed. Adrian Cole, the untouchable billionaire, and Emily Carter, the invisible assistant, were bound together not by love, not yet, but by necessity. Word spread quickly. The media would soon swarm. The company would spin the story into a fairy tale. And Emily, who once fetched coffee in silence, would step into the role of a billionaire's bride. It was a beginning unlike any other. A marriage born not of affection, but of survival. Yet in that cold agreement lay the spark of something neither of them could yet name. Fate had signed its own contract, and their lives would never again be the same. The announcement of Adrian Cole's sudden engagement hit the media like a lightning strike across a clear sky. Newspapers splashed his name in bold letters, television anchors spoke with hushed excitement, and social media erupted with theories. To the world, Adrian was the billionaire who had built an empire with his own hands, a man famous for his cold precision and solitary lifestyle. And now, out of nowhere, he was to be married. The cameras didn't care that it was a contract, that it was arranged in the sterile ink of legal documents. They only cared about the story, the fairy tale they could spin. Emily Carter, who only weeks ago had been the assistant no one noticed, suddenly found her face plastered on magazine covers and business columns. To some, she was Cinderella, a girl plucked from obscurity into a life of unimaginable luxury. To others, she was nothing more than a gold digger, someone who had schemed her way into the billionaire's world. Every smile she gave was scrutinized, every outfit dissected. Reporters shouted her name as she entered the office, their cameras flashing like fireworks. Emily, who once walked unnoticed through the lobby, now had to shield her eyes from the blinding storm of attention. The engagement party was the first great spectacle. Held at a hotel ballroom overlooking Central Park, it was a swirl of crystal chandeliers, velvet gowns, and champagne glasses that clinked in nervous rhythm. Emily walked in on Adrian's arm, her nerves trembling beneath the surface, though she forced a steady smile. She wore a simple but elegant dress chosen by stylists Adrian's team had hired, and though she looked every bit the part, she felt like an actress on a stage too grand for her. Adrian, as always, appeared flawless. His tailored suit, his calm gaze, his commanding presence looked every inch the powerful man the public expected. Yet when he glanced at Emily, there was something different in his eyes. He didn't smile often, but there was a flicker of acknowledgement, as though he knew how heavy this burden was for her. The crowd whispered. Some admired her beauty, surprised that such grace had gone unnoticed in the company's halls. Others sneered, suggesting she had trapped Adrian. Emily heard fragments of their words, sharp as needles. "She's not one of us. She'll ruin him. She's here for the money." But she kept her chin high, reminding herself that she had chosen this path not for wealth, but for the survival of the company, for the people who worked there, for her mother waiting at home. When Adrian raised his glass to speak, The room fell silent. His voice was deep, steady, the voice of a man who never faltered. "Tonight is not about speculation," he said. "It is about commitment. Emily Carter has stood beside me in ways few will ever understand, and I ask you to respect her as you respect me." It was not love, he declared, not yet, but it was protection. And in that moment, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, photo sessions, and carefully staged appearances. Public relations teams worked tirelessly, spinning the engagement into a story of romance, resilience, and stability. The company's stock began to recover, investors calmed, and for the first time in weeks, hope flickered through the halls of Cole Enterprises. But behind the glitter of the cameras, Emily's life was no fairy tale. She returned to the office only to face sharp glances from colleagues who once ignored her. Some smiled to her face now, dripping with false kindness, but she could hear the judgment in their whispers when she passed. "She's a nobody," they said. "She doesn't deserve him." Yet Emily held her head high, her quiet strength undimmed. At night, when the parties ended and the lights dimmed, she returned to the mansion Adrian called home. There, in the vast silence of rooms too large for comfort, she would sit by her window and look out over the city. She wondered if she had made the right choice, if she could endure the weight of being under the world's gaze. And though Adrian never said the words, though his manner remained as reserved as ever, there were moments fleeting, subtle when he showed her he understood. A hand offered as they stepped through a crowd. A glance during a press conference that lingered just a moment longer than it should. Protection, not affection. Respect, not yet love. But something was beginning to shift in the spaces between. Emily Carter had stepped into the light of the world, and though the glare was harsh, she did not shrink. She stood tall, the unlikely bride of a billionaire, carrying a secret strength the world had only just begun to see. The mansion Adrian Cole called home was unlike anything Emily Carter had ever imagined. It was a sprawling estate outside the city, where marble floors stretched endlessly, chandeliers glittered like captured starlight, and hallways were so wide they seemed to echo with their own silence. Emily had grown up in a small house where the kitchen table wobbled and the wallpaper peeled with age. Now, she stood inside a palace, her suitcase clutched in trembling hands, wondering how she could ever belong in such a place. Adrian showed her to a room large enough to fit her entire childhood home with windows overlooking manicured gardens. "This will be yours," he said simply, his voice even, without warmth or cruelty. Then he left her standing alone, swallowed by velvet curtains and furniture too perfect to touch. The days that followed were a collision of two worlds. Adrian was a man of schedules and precision. Breakfast at 7 sharp. Meetings conducted with military order. Conversations clipped, efficient, leaving no room for frivolity. Emily, in contrast, lived by instinct. She liked the quiet hum of a morning radio, the comfort of cooking her own meals, the warmth of a laugh shared over something small. In Adrian's house, her ways felt out of place, like wildflowers in a room of polished steel. It began with little things. Emily tried to make coffee in the Graham kitchen, only to be scolded by staff who said, "That's not for you, Mrs. Cole will handle it." She tried to open a window for fresh air, but Adrian's voice cut in sharply, "Leave it closed. The system regulates temperature." She even hummed a tune once while walking down the hall, only to notice Adrian's brow furrow, as though music itself disrupted his order. Their arguments were quiet at first, sharp exchanges like sparks from dry wood. Emily accused him of treating her like another contract. Adrian countered that order was necessary, that without discipline empires fell. "This is not a home," she told him one evening, her voice trembling with frustration. "It's a fortress." He looked at her with those cold blue eyes and replied, "A fortress is what keeps the world from burning it down." And yet, beneath the clashes, something began to stir. For every moment of conflict, there was another of reluctant understanding. One rainy night, when a storm cut the power, Adrian found Emily in the kitchen, lighting candles. He watched her laugh softly as the shadows danced across the walls, her face warm and alive in the flickering glow. For a moment, he saw a kind of strength that had nothing to do with control, a strength born from acceptance, from finding light in the dark. Emily, too, began to glimpse the man behind the armor. Late one evening, she passed by his study and saw him with his head bowed, shoulders heavy, staring at a photo of his late father. He did not notice her watching, but in that quiet, she realized Adrian's coldness was not cruelty but defense. The world had demanded steel from him, and he had obliged. Still, their differences clashed daily. Emily wanted kindness where Adrian demanded efficiency. She wanted laughter where he wanted silence. And yet, every clash forced them to see each other more clearly. She was no longer invisible to him, and he was no longer untouchable to her. The world outside saw them as a perfect pair photographed at galas, whispered about in magazines, but behind the gilded doors, they were two lives colliding, two hearts learning whether they could bend without breaking. It was not love, not yet. It was fire meeting stone, warmth meeting ice. And in that collision, something fragile and unexpected began to take shape. For Emily Carter, it was a lesson that even the most powerful man could be lonely. For Adrian Cole, it was the discovery that even the quietest woman could be unshakable. Theirs was not a romance born of fairy tales, but of friction, of the sharp edges of two worlds forced together. And sometimes, the strongest bonds are forged not in ease, but in fire. The days inside Adrian Cole's mansion no longer felt like endless silence. Something had shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the slow turn of seasons. What began as clashes and cold distance now carried moments of unexpected warmth, small, fleeting, but real. It started with work. Adrian's empire was still under siege, and meetings stretched deep into the night. One evening, as his team argued over numbers in the boardroom, Emily slipped in with a folder in her arms. She had reviewed documents on her own and noticed errors the analysts had missed. When she spoke up, her voice steady and precise, the room fell silent. Adrian watched as his board members leaned forward, listening to the woman they once dismissed. She dismantled the false data line by line until no doubt remained. For the first time, Emily's strength was undeniable. Afterward, as the others filed out, Adrian lingered. He looked at her not the way a man looked at an assistant, but as someone equal, someone necessary. "You were remarkable," he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. Emily blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Praise was rare from Adrian Cole, rarer still when directed at her. In that moment, she caught a glimpse of the man beneath the steel, a man who could recognize courage when he saw it. Outside the boardroom, their lives continued to tangle. Adrian began to notice things he had overlooked. The way Emily hummed softly while making tea, filling the Cole house with a gentle tune. The way she smiled at the household staff, speaking to them as people, not servants. These were things foreign to him, simple, human gestures, but he found himself drawn to them. Emily, in turn, began to see the cracks in Adrian's armor. He still lived by rigid control, but late at night, when the world was quiet, she sometimes found him sitting alone, lost in thought, staring out over the city lights. There was a loneliness in him that no empire could fill. And in those unguarded moments, she felt not fear, but sympathy. Their relationship grew in fragments, stitched together by chance. One evening, when paparazzi cornered them outside a gala, Adrian instinctively pulled her close, his arm wrapped around her shoulders as the cameras flashed. To the world, it was an act of romance. But Emily felt the firmness of his hold, the silent promise to protect her. Later that night, when they returned home, he didn't let go immediately. For a brief second, his eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. Another time, Emily insisted on cooking dinner herself, refusing the chef's help. Adrian scoffed, reminding her they had staff for that. But she ignored him, rolling up her sleeves, determined to make something simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, the kind of meal she remembered from home. When Adrian tasted it, he fell silent, caught off guard by the comfort of flavors he hadn't known since childhood. He said nothing, but he finished every bite. Emily noticed. The arguments didn't vanish, they still clashed often, her warmth against his coldness, her spontaneity against his order. Yet the clashes no longer ended in silence. Sometimes they ended in laughter, sharp at first, then genuine. And each time, the distance between them shrank. Emily began to realize that her heart was no longer untouched. She caught herself thinking of Adrian when he wasn't near, remembering the rare softness in his gaze, the weight of his hand steadying hers during a public event, the way his voice lowered when he spoke only to her. She had entered this arrangement with no intention of love, but now, against her will, affection had begun to bloom. Adrian noticed it too, though he refused to admit it. Love was not a word in his vocabulary. Yet when Emily walked into a room, his attention followed. When she laughed, he listened. And when she wasn't by his side, something in him felt the absence. It unsettled him, this shift he could not control. But he did not push it away. The world outside still believed their marriage was a performance, but within the walls of that mansion, something very real was growing, something neither of them had planned, and both were beginning to feel. What began as a contract was slowly becoming a connection. And though neither spoke the word aloud, both knew it. Love had begun to creep in, soft but unstoppable, like sunlight breaking through a fortress's cracks. The calm that had begun to settle over Cole Enterprises was shattered in an instant. For weeks, the engagement had done its job. Investors regained trust, the media shifted its narrative from scandal to romance, and the company's stock prices climbed again. Emily Carter, once invisible, now stood beside Adrian Cole as a figure the world could not ignore. But peace never lasts long when enemies wait in the shadows. It started with whispers on the internet. A grainy photo leaked online, showing Emily entering the company late at night with documents in hand. Blogs suggested she was a fraud, a manipulator who had forced her way into Adrian's life to gain power. Within hours, tabloids printed headlines, "The Billionaire's Bride Exposed." Rumors swirled that Emily was nothing more than an opportunist who had staged her discovery of the sabotage to win Adrian's trust. Adrian's board grew restless again. In a heated meeting, voices rose. "This girl will destroy everything you've built," one director warned. "The media is questioning her motives, and soon they'll question yours. If you don't cut ties now, Adrian, the company will collapse." Adrian listened silently, his face unreadable. But inside, a storm brewed. He had seen Emily's courage with his own eyes. He had felt her honesty in every word she spoke. And yet, the evidence planted by their enemies was sharp enough to pierce even the strongest defenses. He knew what the world thought. He knew the cost of standing beside her. Emily, meanwhile, felt the weight of the world closing in. Reporters hounded her day and night. They shouted cruel questions, their cameras flashing mercilessly. At work, colleagues whispered louder than before, their stares filled with suspicion. She had been invisible once, now she wished she could be invisible again. But the worst pain came not from strangers, but from the doubt she glimpsed in Adrian's eyes when the accusations first broke. One night, after another barrage of headlines, Emily stood in the garden of the mansion, staring up at the dark sky. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if she had brought more harm than good. When Adrian found her, her voice trembled with anguish. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe you would be better off without me." For a moment, Adrian said nothing. He looked at her, the woman who had saved his company, who had stood beside him when no one else dared, and he felt the pull between duty and heart. His empire demanded sacrifice. The world demanded distance. But his heart, for the first time in years, demanded something else. "Emily," he said finally, his tone softer than she had ever heard, "you are the only reason we are still standing. Don't let their lies become your truth." But the battle was far from over. Their enemy, the rival who had orchestrated the original scandal, doubled down. Leaked emails, forged documents, doctored photos, they poured into the media like poison. The story of Adrian's engagement turned from inspiration into controversy. Crowds outside the company grew hostile. Protesters held signs condemning Emily as a fraud. The more she resisted, the more the world attacked. And yet, through it all, something unbreakable began to form between her and Adrian. Where once there had been distance, now there was unity. They faced the reporters together, side by side, their hands linked for all to see. They endured the sneers at galas, the judgmental glances, the endless speculation. For the first time, it was not just an arrangement, it was a partnership. Still, the pressure bore down heavily. Emily lay awake at night, listening to the silence of the mansion, wondering how long she could endure the storm. Adrian, too, wrestled with doubts he never voiced aloud. He had promised himself long ago that love was weakness. And now, standing at the edge of ruin, he realized he was willing to risk everything for a woman the world wanted to tear down. The enemy had struck hard, but they had not yet won. In the crucible of lies and accusations, a fire had been lit. Adrian and Emily were no longer strangers bound by a contract. They were two souls standing against the world, learning that sometimes love is not born in peace, but in battle. The day of the wedding dawned beneath a gray sky, heavy with clouds that threatened rain. The city pulsed with anticipation. Reporters lined the streets outside the cathedral, cameras ready, microphones poised, their voices sharp with speculation. To the public, it was to be the event of the season, the union of Adrian Cole, the untouchable billionaire, with Emily Carter, the girl no one had known until weeks ago. But beneath the glitter of flowers and golden decorations, there was tension, thick and unspoken. Inside the cathedral, chandeliers glowed with warm light, casting halos upon the polished marble floor. Guests filled the pews, politicians, investors, socialites, every seat occupied by someone eager to witness either a spectacle of romance or the collapse of a facade. Many came to watch, not with joy, but with skepticism. To them, Emily was still an intruder, a woman who did not belong in this world. Emily walked slowly down the aisle, her gown simple yet radiant, her hands trembling as she clutched her bouquet. She felt every stare, every whisper. She doesn't deserve him. This is all a game. The words echoed in her mind, but she kept her chin lifted, her eyes fixed on the man waiting at the altar. Adrian stood there, tall, steady, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she wondered if he would truly go through with Ida, if, at the last second, he would step away. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke solemn words of union, of vows and promises. Emily's voice shook as she repeated the phrases, her heart torn between fear and hope. She glanced at Adrian, searching for any sign of warmth. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed forward. She felt the sting of doubt pierce her chest. Then came the moment that would decide everything. "Do you, Adrian Cole, take Emily Carter?" The officiant's words hung in the air, the silence pressing heavy upon the grand cathedral. Cameras zoomed in, waiting for his answer. Reporters leaned forward, ready to twist whatever he said into headlines. The world seemed to hold its breath. Adrian looked at Emily. For a long moment, he said nothing. In his eyes, she saw the battle raging, the duty to his company, the demands of the board, the weight of public opinion. And then, like a sudden break in storm clouds, his voice rang out, clear and unyielding. "I do. And let me make this clear, this is not a contract. This is not an arrangement. This is my choice. Emily Carter is not a pawn, not a fraud, and not a mistake. She is the woman I love, and today, I make that truth known to the world." The cathedral erupted in gasps. Cameras flashed wildly. Guests shifted in their seats, stunned by the raw declaration. For Adrian Cole, the man who never showed weakness, the man who spoke only in strategy to proclaim love in front of the world, was unthinkable. Yet here he was, breaking every rule he had built his life upon. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She had braced herself for rejection, for a cold continuation of their arrangement. Instead, he had given her something real, something she had never expected, his heart, laid bare before everyone. Her voice quivered as she whispered her vow, her words no longer rehearsed but alive with emotion. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, but the words hardly mattered. What mattered was the look in Adrian's eyes, steady and sure, and the warmth of his hand as he took hers. For the first time, their marriage was no longer survival, it was truth. Outside, the rain finally fell, but no one cared. The cathedral doors opened, and Adrian and Emily stepped into the storm together. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, the world clamored for answers. But for once, Adrian didn't see them. He saw only Emily, her hand in his, her smile breaking through tears. The world had doubted them, enemies had tried to destroy them, even Adrian himself had once questioned her place in his life. But now, with the entire world watching, he had declared her his partner not out of necessity, but out of love. And in that moment, their story ceased to be about scandal or survival. It became a story of faith, courage, and the unexpected power of the human heart. The wedding that was supposed to be a contract had become something far greater. In the days that followed Adrian's declaration, the world buzzed with shock and wonder. Newspapers no longer printed headlines about fraud or conspiracy. Instead, they carried photographs of a billionaire holding his new wife's hand beneath a rain-soaked sky, his face uncharacteristically soft, hers glowing with tears and joy. The narrative had changed. The scandal that once threatened to destroy Cole Enterprises had vanished under the weight of a love story too powerful to deny. Inside the company, a new calm settled. Investors, reassured not only by stability but by Adrian's very public show of conviction, returned with renewed confidence. The stock market rallied, and the empire that had teetered on the edge of ruin stood tall once more. And at the heart of it all was Emily Carter, the woman who had once been invisible, now hailed as the unexpected savior of a kingdom. Yet for Emily, the real victory wasn't in the numbers or the headlines. It was in the quiet moments she now shared with Adrian. Their home, once cold and silent, began to change. She filled the kitchen with the aroma of simple meals that reminded them both of family. She opened the windows, letting fresh air and laughter into rooms that had been sealed too long. And Adrian, to everyone's surprise, welcomed it. He found himself drawn to the warmth she carried, the way she turned marble halls into something resembling a home. Their relationship grew not in grand gestures, but in the small things. Adrian learned to slow down, to sit at the table with her and listen, really listen, to her stories of childhood and dreams for the future. Emily, in turn, came to understand the weight he carried, the endless demands of leadership, the loneliness of a man always expected to be perfect. Together, they built a rhythm, one step at a time, until the distance between them faded completely. The world still watched, of course. Paparazzi followed their every move. Commentators debated whether Adrian's declaration had been strategy or sincerity. But inside the life they were building, none of it mattered. What had begun as an arrangement of survival had become a love both of them had once thought impossible. One evening, months after the wedding, Adrian stood with Emily on the balcony of their home. The city lights stretched endlessly before them, glittering like stars. He turned to her, his voice quiet but steady. When this began, I thought I was making a deal. I never believed in love. But you, his hand brushed hers, warm and firm. You changed everything. Emily smiled, her heart swelling at words she had once thought she'd never hear from him. And you showed me that even the coldest walls can be broken, Adrian. You taught me not to give up on myself. They stood in silence, not the empty silence of before, but a peaceful one, two souls no longer bound by paper or pretense, but by trust and devotion. The story of Adrian Cole and Emily Carter was told in boardrooms and newspapers, in whispers across dinner tables, in fairy tale versions spun for magazines. But the truth was simpler, quieter. It was the story of a man who discovered that wealth and power could never replace the strength of love, and of a woman who proved that dignity and courage could shine brighter than status. And so, the marriage that began as false became truer than either had dreamed. Emily was no longer invisible. Adrian was no longer untouchable. Together, they had built something real, something unshakable. In the end, it wasn't the contract that saved them. It was the choice to love, freely and without fear. For the world, they were a symbol. For each other, they were home.